Out of the Cave to Become Men, Journaling History by Doug Ferguson. Read by Doug Ferguson. Chapter 6, The Conflicts. In this world, there seems to be always conflict. There are conflicts outside of us and inside of us. How can we grasp an understanding the torment everywhere? How do we wrestle to control this reality of things being wrong? Nothing is as it ought to be. We are all frustrated in our inadequacy of making things right. Maybe if we knew more, could see more, or increase our understanding, then we could break from our powerlessness. Understanding history could possibly give us some plan of action to address the conflicts in the world. Band-aids will not solve the open wounds of conflict. Patches and paint are no solution. Burying our head in the sand will only increase our fears and frustration. The challenges of life are more than patches and paint, smoke and mirrors that are used to mislead ourselves and allow others to take control. And if none are controlling our destinies, letting the fates decide is no solution and will leave us in darkness of despair. Rather, we need to be enlightened to face the challenge of living. Ignoring the problems doesn't solve them. Sweeping dirt under the rug does not clean the room of the dust that causes the allergies or stop belaboring for the breath of life. Do not just be followers, being led to the slaughter. Awaken to reality. Become aware of the world and the herders who lead you onto the path to their agenda, whatever that agenda is. Our experience can overwhelm us and transform us into something that we once hated. If we don't have an eternal perspective of what ought to be, our limited, finite feelings take control of us. When our emotions control us, we give up our power to choose. Then we become slaves to the material. The material overwhelms us by feelings and things. When we examine our life, we become too overwhelmed to face the built-up piling of things. In our living, we tunnel through our comforting, familiar mess of our hobbit house cave. This mess we avoid until a crisis makes it unavoidable. We don't realize how much we have gathered until we move. If we never move, then our precious things are inherited to become the burden of others. Why have we allowed the material to become such a burden? What is working in our consciousness that takes control of our rationale? What perspective of reality creates this clutter in our life? Why is the material controlling our fate? Why do we gather stuff? What is controlling our reality? Subconsciously, we have allowed the worldview reality that material controls consciousness to burden us. We avoid looking at this reality until it is shoved into our face when crisis comes upon us. Then we are overwhelmed by this reality. How will we be able to overcome the material? What can we do? The burden of the hoarder I have used to expose the conflict of worldviews. How does the psychologist in a hoarder show bring positive resolution to the crisis? The psychologist attempts to bring the hoarder out of a life dependent on the material. Instead, the hoarder needs to desire people. This drama of the hoarder is the drama of conflict between two worldviews that have plagued humanity since the beginning. It is the conflict that has caused wars and created and destroyed nations. It is the conflict of two primary worldviews. Are we even aware of this conflict in us and around us? Do we really know who or what we are? What is driving our life in the now? Where will our life path lead us? What makes us tick to the timing of the clock of life? The conflict in us confuses and leaves us in chaos and despair. In the darkness of the cave, we must find the light that will enlighten and move us on the path to life. But are we up to the challenge to look in the mirror and identify the two forces residing in our soul? One that wants to hoard and control for the security in things hidden in the self-induced prisons. Another that wants to explore new lands and know new ways, finding new people and meeting the challenges of life. Are we finding purpose in the building of relationships and covenants with others? One path burying the head in the secure sand of ignorance, condemning others for their success. The other path is on top of the mountain looking out, the views of the misty unknown past behind, and the foggy future of possibilities ahead. Where we accept our frailty and grasp the helping hand that edifies and gives encouragement in the challenges, believing in a vision of hope, a promise of tomorrow. The choice is always before us, whether to hide in the security of self-induced knowledge of ignorance, the self-righteous know-it-all, or to face the unknown, security or promise. In each of us this battle rages. The decision is ours, and in doing we find ourselves. Is the material eternal? Are all things formed by the universe? We perceive patterns and orders in the universe, but is this an illusion of our perception? Why does a thing have design and order? Does the material have consciousness? Does the material have conscious thought to plan and order itself? In this age of computers, we imagine that we can create a consciousness like us from the material. If we are only matter and we have a consciousness, surely it must be possible to create consciousness out of matter. But is matter conscious? Is consciousness real? Are we self-aware? Are we only robots of the universe? Do we just do mindless functions in a mindless universe? Are we only a cog with no real purpose? Those that conclude that the material is all there is believe that making a consciousness out of the material is possible. Our movies, media, and academia have portrayed that we will create consciousness out of the material. Doing this will give support that the universe can create machines with self-awareness. The materials thinks that they can achieve freedom by becoming a machine of the universe. What type of freedom is achieved from this worldview? It is the freedom from guilt, a freedom to be a victim of the powers that be in the universe of the fates. Being a materialist, one can dehumanize themselves, declaring to all that we are just gears grinding to nowhere, so why worry about life? With the material being eternal, we become machines of the universe. We are just programmed with inputs for outputs. Some are resigned to the fates, and some consider themselves as self-programming machines. If we consider ourselves lacking, we can remake ourselves. We can reprogram ourselves. If only we can find the perfect self-help book that can recreate us into an eternal material of wonder and grace. But are we a cog, being created from inputs caused before our time? Can we reprogram and rebuild? As I muse of this, I consider the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. In the story, the mice have created the machine of the Earth, which was created by a computer called Deep Thought, which is another machine. If we consider this point of who created Deep Thought, we would get into an infinite regression of who created who. Infinite regression is faulty reasoning because it is a form of circular logic. Infinite regression, in this case, is this machine was created by that machine, which created by the machine before that time, and so on. When one machine verifies the other machine in a circular recursive pattern. Circular logic is used all the time. Another example is the writer of a book will say that they have the truth, and they use the book that they have written to verify them because the book says the writer of the book is the prophet of truth. So the book verifies the writer, and the writer verifies the book. This is circular logic. Getting back to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the inputs of the Earth will create the answers to the meaning of life, the universe, and everything. The basic premise of the story is we are machines caught in the cogs of the universe, and that life has no real meaning. So you just might as well do your best at enjoying yourself, and don't worry or panic about the craziness around you. It is fun to muse about how the passengers in the spaceship Heart of Gold deal with life's challenges. When reality overwhelms, we can just hit the improbability button, disassociate ourselves with reality, and become crazy. And somehow, when we come back into reality, our problems will solve themselves. An entertaining thought, but escaping from reality does not solve problems, for they are even worse when we come back in sync with reality. Many have disassociated themselves from reality in a hope that this process will solve their problems of dealing with their faults and the harshness of reality. In truth, some have created major world religions which embrace this process of disassociating themselves from reality. So we have discussed the worldview that the material is the meaning of life. It leads to grasping for the material for security in this world. This worldview is countered by making people the focus of living. There is a conflict between these two worldviews. One that information leads to material, another is material leads to information. The first is proactive in living. Information is the mind understanding the material, the mind creating and changing the world, the mind understanding, planning, and organizing the world into something creative and new. The other is reactive, wanting to keep things the same, believing in balance, to not change and upset the status quo. Instead, the goal of those who believe in the material is to hide in the camouflage of the universe. This is the worldview of the Hoarder. They use a mountain of stuff to hide from the reality of the world. They live in a fantasy they created from the pile of material around them. Eventually, if they cannot come out of their fantasy, they will withdraw from life and die in their mess. The materialist resists changing the environment, for to change the environment is to rebel against the universe. To reject the mountain of stuff is to move out of their safe space. They become phobic with the fear of reaping the wrath of the universe. If they let go of the material, they lose control of their fantasy world, and the phobic fear causes them to scream in terror. Rene Descartes' Latin philosophical proposition, cogito ergo sum, translated as I think, therefore I am, or I experience, therefore I am, is a conclusion that we are self-aware. We are more than the material. But does philosophy of consciousness deliver us from defeat? Can it overcome fate? Some think that it really doesn't matter what philosophy determines your path in the world. The defeated consider both views lead to being powerless. We are trapped, victims of the powers that be. Though one philosophy is without guilt, the other leaves one in guilt. The destination is the same. The guilty philosophy, with God, the eternal conscious being the overlord, that declares you the sinner, because that is what you are. You can only be good if you deny yourself and become the surrendered robot of the tyrant God, surrendered all to the great consciousness. It doesn't matter if the universe is king or the tyrant God is king. The results are the same. We are only puppets. But is that so? Are we only puppets? Can our life change the course of life? Does our life have meaning? Those who confront the Hoarder philosophy, those who wish to address the tyrant kings, they are considered rebels against the fates of the universe. They are considered evil, for they wish to question the status quo. They wish to disturb the garbage piled around us. They want us to look at ourselves. They make us feel bad for accepting our fate as victims. They want us to be responsible. They question the powers that be. They question the authority that takes care of us. The rebels, who consider themselves more than puppets of fates, have a worldview that they have importance. How can they be so arrogant? They believe that they are individuals. Their conscious decisions can change the world they live in. They have embraced the world philosophy that information transforms the material. They climb out of the piled mess of the murkwood forest into the light. Breathing the fresh air, they glimpse the way to life. They see the evidence of the unseen. By faith, they continue on their journey. They embrace and believe the conscious decisions of the mind, using information, knowledge, and understanding to change the material universe. Where did they get their arrogance that they can change the world around them? Why do some think that there are gods that can recreate the world? This image of consciousness creating the world is espoused in Genesis. The universal fates are not in control, rather the eternal consciousness. The first cause creates the material out of nothing. Elohim, the plural one, is the spirit who hovers over the abyss of black chaos, and is the word who speaks to create and transform the universe. The eternal consciousness are not the victims of the universe. Instead, consciousnesses created and molded the universe into what they desire, and after the material was worked upon, it was considered good. In Genesis, in the Torah, it is declared that humanity is made in the image of these eternal consciousnesses. It is a religion of consciousness, an eternal material religion, which has many different names, one of these being scientism or postmodernism or whatever. Matter is eternal, and what we consider as consciousness is an illusion. This illusionary consciousness we possess does not perceive reality, but rather a self-conceived universe. There is no true reality. Each one's reality is as relevant as another's. What is scientism? A philosophy that you've probably never heard of before, though you have been influenced greatly in your education by it. Scientism is a belief that began developing and gaining adherence in Western societies in the late 19th century. Hilary Putnam and Zatan Todorov, who are philosophers, declared scientism as the dogmatic endorsement of scientific methodology and reduction of all knowledge to only that which is measurable or empirical. This worldview is based on matter defines information. Dennis Alexander is the Emeritus Director of Faraday Institute for Science and Religion at St. Edmund's College, Cambridge, a molecular biologist and an author on science and religion. He has talked and written about scientism, and I recommend reading and listening to him to get a grasp of the historical issues of this. Also, Jordan Peterson talks a lot about postmodernism. In the Western world, from the 16th century to now, the conflict between many theists and atheists worldviews have been climaxing for supremacy. In the 20th century, atheistic scientism took a big hit in cosmology when the universe was determined to have a beginning. This, of course, is still confidently denied by believers in scientism using unprovable or logically deficient theorems such as the multi-universe, the law of gravity, vacuum energy, and so on. Next, the conclusion of the double slit experiment caused no end of destruction to the paradigm that the material is the primary cause of the universe. What is the conclusion of the double slit experiment? Its conclusion is that information determines what material will be, with information determining whether matter is a wave or a particle. Really, it is a mind-bender of an experiment. Look it up and consider. What decisions are we going to make? Who do we want to be? Are we to accept being tools of the fates of the universe? Are we going to continue to live life as victims? Or are we going to overcome our victimhood and the powers that be? Are we going to address the judgment of our failures of what we ought to be and take on the curse of the material that has piled around our life? Let us not justify the piled garbage in our life with convoluted reasoning and logic. When observing our reality, let us not look at crap and say, I need that. Let us not look at the broken ways of doing things and say, if I just do it one more time, it will work. Instead, throw away the broken ways. Determine what is good and true and follow that way. Do not let the material control life. Listen and cherish the consciousnesses around you. Make the conscious decision to not be a victim. The theistic and the materialistic world view battle it out in the world we live in. Become the image you were created to be. Do what is good and righteous. Transform your world. Accept responsibility. Take conscious control over the chaos. Learn what is good and true. Find the light. Become the beacon on the hill. Overcome the conflict in you and in the world. Take on the challenge of life. In the age that we live, socialists are promoting a great communal global community. This is not the first time where the narrative has been espoused to gather humanity into one civilized utopia. But are those talking up utopia like a salesman's spiel, really bringing us together in peace and harmony? Socialists preach all identities are equal in value. If some groups do better than others, the conclusion must be that one group is stealing from the other. The socialists preach that the successful group should feel guilty of their success because they have become successful by stealing from the victim group. They preach such to make the successful feel guilty, so they will give up their identity and wealth to justify the covetousness of the unsuccessful. The socialist preaches this oppressor-victim relationship, which creates division and violence between groups. After the revolution, the mothering socialists are to collect the broken pieces, declaring themselves the people's healer. Do not think that the violence of this dogma cannot engulf your current peace. Do not sleep while it possesses the minds around you. Violence has occurred in the past. You are not exempt from it to occur in your future. For this strategy is not a new phenomenon. It has been repeated for millennia, which you will recognize in the mythology of Osiris, which I will discuss in another chapter. Socialists use identity politics to divide and conquer. Each identified group is a victim of another. Preaching justice for all, the socialist power players fabricate injustices to create war between people. We are all being played against each other. It is just a ploy used to divide and conquer opposition. Setting a goal as utopia, all those that oppose must be the enemy. Any who challenge and criticize the narrative certainly must be evil. Why else would they oppose utopia? Utopia, the fantasy where there are no nations, no religions, no thoughts to divide the peoplehood, as espoused in John Lennon's song Imagine. The stage is set. It is us against them, or them against us. Sometimes it's so confusing to determine the enemy. Those that criticize must be racist, fascist, or some other demonized monster. To criticize, surely they must be evil against the common good of reaching utopia promised. So say the Stalins of the world as they divide and conquer in their chance to grab all the marbles in their addicted lust for power and dominance. It is the battle of the mega sociopathic demigods. What can turn man into these murderous monsters? Their original intentions led them to be priests and teachers, yet they became corrupted by evil desires. How did they become transformed? As teachers in society, they had some knowledge, With this limited knowledge, they found that they could dominate others. Priests and teachers became self-promoting bullies, forming gangs and dominating those around them. The experience of dominance induced the drug of dominance in their brain. Though they once had good intentions, they were not self-aware and became druggies for power. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. According to Salvinder Afi, a neuroscientist at Wilfrid Laurier University, the mentality for dominance has been studied and has been found to create chemically induced brain hormones to drive sociopaths brutally onward. For our brain hormones can influence our thoughts and our environment, and thoughts influence our brain, such that the more power we feel we have creates a high that we crave. We can become addicted to power like a druggie is addicted to heroin. Epic struggles of the mega sociopathic demagogues and their gangs can easily sweep across the world and engulf us. We can accidentally or intently become part of this struggle for control, for it is all around us and the struggle is in us. Our internal struggles can overwhelm us, and the external struggles can engulf us like a tsunami, catching us unaware. Are we sleeping, unaware of the time we are in? Like no time before, the world can change in a twinkling of an eye.